Hi, I'm Doriana, and I'm a Webflow developer. Today, I want to show you how I built this really cool animation on Webflow using the GSAP library and the scroll trigger plugin. So the GSAP library is a JavaScript library that allows you to animate properties that Webflow doesn't allow. For example, border radius or the position of elements, and also allows you to add and remove combo classes. So for this specific animation, we're gonna change the position of elements based on the position of other elements. And we are also gonna add or remove combo classes. So as you can see in the initial view, we have this heading, we have a background image, and on top of the background image, we have an overlay with an opacity of 40. So then when we start scrolling and this paragraph start getting into view, the opacity of the overlay gets darker and goes from a 40, the initial 40 opacity, to a 70. And once we start scrolling and the paragraph reaches the headings become scrollable as well. So when we start scrolling and we scroll all the way up, once the paragraph exits the view, the opacity goes from a 0 opacity, so it's basically transparent, and also the image it becomes scrollable. And if we go back, everything gets restored from the beginning. There you go. All right, so first I'm gonna show you how I build the structure on Webflow. Then I'm gonna show you the code, and then eventually, lastly, I'm gonna show you what happened in the actual code in the web page. All right, let's get started. Okay, so first thing, I went ahead and I put some dummy content on the page so that the page is scrollable to better see the animation once it's done. So the first thing I'm going to do is to create the main section that will contain the animation. Let's call this section Immersive Hero. All right. Now, let's create a wrapper that will contain the content. And let's call this Immersive Hero Content Wrapper. I'm just copying and pasting the name of the class. I don't misspell anything. For this element, I want to set the position to relative and a minimum height of 100 viewport high so that it covers the entire viewport. So now let's create the Immersive Hero image wrapper, which will be the element that will be pinned and unpinned based on the position of the paragraph. So let's give it a width of 100 viewport width and a height of 100 viewport height. Let's set the overflow to visible and a relative position with a z-index of 10. All right, so now let's go ahead and put an image inside. Let's give it a class of Immersive Hero Image, and let's give it 100% width and 100% height. And we also want to set the position to absolute, top left, with a z-index of 10. And let's also set it to cover. Okay, now let's upload the actual image. And here we go, this is the image. All right. Okay, so now we're done with this, and let's move on to create the overlay. Let's call this div block Immersive Hero Overlay. set to 100% width and 100% height. Absolute position set to full. And as you can see, this is relative to the immersive hero content wrapper. Let's set its z-index to 20 so that it gets stuck on top of the image. And also let's set the background color to black with an opacity of 40. So now we want to set a background color transition so that its transition is smooth. So let's set, we want to set the type of the transition to background color with a duration of, let's say, 250 milliseconds and a linear easing. So now we want to create the two combo classes. They're going to be removed and added based on the position of the paragraph. Let's call the first one opacity 70. And let's change the opacity of the background to 70. Now let's remove it and create the other one. And let's call this overlay opacity none. And let's change the opacity to 0. And now let's remove the class. Now the next element is the heading wrapper. Let's call this immersive hero heading wrapper. And let's set it to a width of 100%. Yeah, heading wrapper with a width of 100%. An absolute position, top left, with a z-index of 20, so that it gets stuck on top of the overlay and the image. So inside the heading wrapper, let's put the container large. And inside the container large, the padding global, so that everything gets centered. Inside the padding global, let's put the div with a class of row. I use the 12-column system to build my website. And inside the row, let's have the heading expand for 6 columns. So basically a max width of 50%. So now let's put our heading in it. And let's give it a class of immersive hero heading. Let's set the color to white. And set the padding top to 40 pixel divided by 16 RAM. And the padding top to 44 pixel divided by 16 RAM. So that there is some space. Lastly, let's create the paragraph wrapper. And let's call this immersive hero paragraph wrapper. Let's give it 100% width and an absolute position. And again, this is relative to the immersive hero content wrapper. Let's set the top to 100%, 100 viewport height, so that initially is not in the viewport. And let's also set the z-index of 30, so that it gets stuck on top of the image and the overlay, just as the heading. we won't be able to see the paragraph, we want to add 100%, 150% view age to the content wrapper. So let's just change that. Now let's go ahead and put our paragraph. No, actually, we want to put the container large first. Then let's put the global padding. Then again, let's put our row. And just like the heading, we want the paragraph to be 6 column, so 50% max width. And now let's actually put inside our paragraph. Let's call this Immersive Hero Paragraph. Let's give it a color of white. And there we go. So here, this is the structure that we're gonna use. And this is how I built it. Okay, now let's go ahead and put our code in the page setting. So this code can go either in the page setting or in the site setting. So I'm just gonna copy and paste the code and I'm just gonna leave it in the description for you. So this first line of code is the line that adds the GSAP library to the project, to the page. The second one is the one that adds the scroll trigger plugin to the page. So then we have this first line here that initializes the scroll trigger. Okay, now this block of code is the code that is gonna pin and unpin the Immersive Hero heading wrapper, which is gonna be our trigger. And what we're doing here is that we're saying that when the top of our trigger reaches the top of the viewport, this element is gonna be pinned. So the first parameter always refer to the trigger, where the second one always refer to the viewport. So now we are setting as the end trigger for the pinning the paragraph wrapper. But in order to determine the endpoint, we are going to use a function. With this function, we want to end the pinning when the top of the end trigger reaches a specific point relative to the viewport. In this case, we are dynamically calculating the height of the Immersive Hero heading, and we are subtracting this value from the top of the viewport. And with this pin through, we are basically saying that we want to pin the element. Now, the second block of code will be responsible for pinning the Immersive Hero image wrapper. And so we are setting as the trigger the Immersive Hero image wrapper. And we are saying that we want to start the animation when the top of our trigger reaches the top of the viewport. And we want to end when our end trigger, in this case, Immersive Hero paragraph wrapper, so the bottom of the end trigger reaches the top of the viewport. And again, we are setting, again, pin to true in order to say that we want to pin the trigger. Okay, now lastly, with the last block of code, we want to change the opacity of the Immersive Hero overlay. And we're going to do this by adding and removing the classes that we created before. Opacity, the overlay opacity 70 and the overlay opacity none. So we are taking as the trigger the Immersive Hero paragraph wrapper. And we're saying that on enter, we want to take our Immersive Hero overlay and we want to add it to it the overlay opacity 70. Then on leave, so when our trigger leaves from the top, we want to remove from the Immersive Hero overlay, we want to remove the overlay opacity 70 and we want to add the overlay opacity none. Then again on enter back. So if we scroll back, we want to take the same selector, so immersive hero overlay. We want to remove the overlay opacity none, and we want to add the overlay opacity 70. And then lastly, on leave back, so when we scroll back and we get from the beginning, we're going to take the same selector, immersive hero overlay, and we're going to remove the overlay opacity 70. Okay, so we are done with the code. Let's now save our changes and let's publish the website so that we can actually see the animation. We cannot really see it in the designer. So let's go ahead. And there we go. Let's scroll. And there you go. See the opacity changes, and then we scroll back. The heading gets pinned again. Scroll back. So we scroll back again. And also the image gets unpinned. And we can keep scrolling our page. Okay, now let's see what happened in the actual code. So let's inspect the page. And the first thing we're going to notice is that there are two elements with the class pin spacer that get added. Then we can also see that the immersive hero image wrapper and the immersive hero heading wrapper have a position fixed. So then when we start scrolling and the paragraph reaches the heading, the position fix from the heading wrapper gets removed. And same thing for the image wrapper. Once the paragraph, the bottom of the paragraph reaches the top of the viewport, the position fix for the image wrapper gets removed as well. Immersive hero overlay, we can see that when we start scrolling, the overlay opacity 70 gets added. And once we scroll up, the overlay opacity none gets added. And then if we scroll back again, the opacity changes based on the classes. Now let's make everything responsive so that everything works correctly in all devices. So the first thing we want to do is we want to have the heading expand for the entire 12 columns. So let's add col small 12. And same thing for the paragraph. We wanted to expand 12 column in the mobile view. And then we want to do is we want to just reduce the padding top of the heading just a little bit. So let's see. All right, looks better now. So let's publish again. And let's see. All right, so let's refresh. Okay, let's inspect it. And now let's see how it actually changes. All right, so I'm gonna just change the width. Well, let me refresh here. All right, so here we are in the tablet view. And then if we reduce, everything gets larger. But as we can see, the animation works perfectly, even if the size of the viewport gets smaller. There you go.